sweat ball. I'm a sweat ball. My hot girl summer is yet to arrive. It might be lost in the post somewhere. Today, I want to talk about authors. I had this idea, well, actually, first, I had this idea of doing the worst books by great authors. That was the original pitch. Still might do that, but I thought, hey, that's a very negative way to open things. Why not do the best books by the best authors first? The cicadas are murderous. I don't know if you can hear them. Let me turn the sound quality off for a second in the edit. Anyway, not going to soak up too much of your time. What I will do, I'll tell you the author, the text of theirs I've read, and then the one that I believe is my favorite and why. This is also a really good opportunity for me to talk about certain authors that I love, that I appreciate, that I enjoy, but maybe I haven't spoken about on the channel very thoroughly yet. And to that end, let's talk about C Esslemont, co-author of the Malazan universe. I've referenced Stephen Erickson many times, the author of Malazan Book of the Fallen, of Carcanus, of Witness, of Balkaline and Corbo Brooch, etc., etc., etc. Goats of Glory. But he is only one of the two authors who created the Malazan universe. And C Esslemont has written the novels of the Malazan Empire, and he's also written the Path to Ascendancy series, which currently has 4 books out, but I believe, just checking my microphone's still on, is going to be 6. And I've read all of them. And what I'll tell you is I find Esslemont's stuff a mix of quality. There's some stuff that maybe isn't to my liking, and there's some stuff that I think is absolutely superb. And the text I've chosen to talk to you about today very quickly is Dancer's Lament, which is book 1 of the Paths to Ascendancy series. There it is. This is a great little book. I say little. I think it's 400 pages, which is little for fantasy. This is a prequel series that follows Kellanved and Dancer, the original team Emperor and Emperor's best mate, who are in charge of the Malazan Empire at the start of Gardens of the Moon. It starts off with them as young men meeting for the first time, and it tracks them, the series as a whole tracks them through their kind of formative years and how the Malazan Empire bubbles up due to their shenanigans. That's what I'd call it, shenanigans. Over the course of the Paths to Ascendancy series, you do have more and more characters introduced, characters that we know from the various Malazan books. But right here at the beginning, it's quite contained, it's quite succinct. You only have 4 POVs as opposed to the classic Malazan 2025, and each of them feels really needed. Each of them feels really necessary. I think Esslemont was very clever with the characters he chose to introduce here and to give them enough time to reintroduce them to you or let them breathe on the page and discover who they are. Not who they're going to be 100 years in the future, but who they are now. It's really tactfully done. And I believe Esslemont's writing is really sharp here. It's often very light-hearted and comedic. The banter between Kellanved and Dancer is brilliant. But there's also a really surprising level of poetic description and scene setting. There was a mosquito there. It's also a really great jumping on point to start. So if you've heard of Malazan, Gardens of the Moon, you bounced off it, you're not sure it's for you, you could read Dancer's Lament just to see if it's something that you're interested in. I would recommend that. I would always say start with Gardens of the Moon. I do think Dancer's Lament is probably your second best bet. What was that NPC in the original Pokemon games? The young boy who generally has bug-type Pokemon. That's kind of what I feel I look like today. Right, let's talk about Cixin Liu, an author I deeply respect and also a name I'm probably butchering. Cixin Liu wrote the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, The Three-Body Problem. He's written a number of short story collections and a number of novels. I've read, I believe, every single piece of English translated fiction out by him. Psst, come here, listen. Cixin Liu's other novels aren't very good. His short stories are. I really recommend his short stories. I want to do a video on his short stories at some point. But the best novel he's written is The Dark Forest, which is the second book in Remembrance of Earth's Past, also known as the Three-Body Problem trilogy. I am going to spoil book 1 here because, well, most people wouldn't call it a spoiler. I think if you don't know anything about Three-Body Problem, don't look it up. Don't look at the back of the book. Don't look at the Netflix adaptation, because I think what book 1 really does well, side tangent, in the Three-Body Problem universe is it doesn't tell you what the story is until you've kind of got about 2/3 through the Three-Body Problem book. So I would actually recommend, if you've not read anything by Cixin Liu, if you've not read Three-Body Problem, skip this one, because I think you really should discover the Three-Body Problem yourself. Okay, that's your spoiler warning done. At the end of Three-Body Problem, book 1, we know the aliens are coming. We've got, I think, 400 years until they're on our doorstep, and we know that they are technologically far superior to us. We've not got a snowball's chance, right? They're coming, and we just have to wait it out. That is where the Dark Forest starts. The novel is just all about how are we going to face this thing? We know the aliens are coming. We know they're antagonistic. What do we do? And Cixin Liu offers some really interesting answers, a lot of quite bleak, pessimistic answers, but it's handled really well. I love Cixin Liu. Well, don't know him. I love his work. He's not very strong in terms of prose, at least the translations of his work. The prose feels very blunt. It feels very XYZ, matter of fact. There is no poetic qualities to Cixin Liu's words, at least as they appear on the English paper. His characters are also a little bit, you could go back and forth on them. There's one character who I think is excellent, does some really kind of, what's the word? Awkward things in this book. It's not flawless. But in terms of I'm going to sit back down. In terms of the ideas, this thing is just fabulous. Every 50 pages, something happened in the Dark Forest that made me go, whoa. Every 50 pages, that's not an exaggeration. This book took me about 2 weeks to read because my mind was just continually exploding from all these little scientific premises that Liu carries forward in his work. He'll take something about, the concept of gravity or the concept of dimensions or something like that, and he'll explore it in a really interesting, mind-boggling way. I'm not saying I got much more clever by reading The Dark Forest, but certainly I became aware of my own inadequacies, my own scientific inadequacies by reading this book. And the ending, once I finished the ending of The Dark Forest, I'm kneeling on the floor talking to you. I went for an 2-hour long walk just thinking about this novel and all the ideas that it's putting forward and propagating. It's quite dark. It's very dark. It's you could argue it's bleak, but certainly there is a level of heroism and keep going no matter what under the surface here. For a Chinese author, it's very much a stiff British upper lip kind of a thing going on. It's marvelous. It's a really good book. Hello, I found a tree stump. I'm going to utilize it. Right. Hello. Paint me like one of your French girls. Right, that's a bit better. Okay, I wanted to talk about Fonda Lee next, because usually I have brought Fonda Lee up on the channel, but usually it's in the context of Jade Legacy, the third book in the Greenbone saga, which I do still stand by, I think is a slightly disappointing work. But I also feel like by harping on about Jade Legacy, I'm doing Fonda Lee a disservice, because Jade War, book 2, is an absolute banger and is one of my favourite books of last year. Now, a bit difficult to talk about because I don't want to spoil book 1. The Greenbone saga, if you're not aware, is a kind of Asian-inspired, in my mind it feels very much like Hong Kong, something like that, but also Godfather-esque fantasy work, urban fantasy. It takes place in a small island nation of Cixin, which is right on the edge of the map. The inhabitants of this country have access to this element called jade, which is both kind of superpower imbuing, but also a drug. It's a bit complicated. And we follow a family of essentially gangsters as they continue to control and try and keep a grip on about half of the capital city of this island. It's really drives into themes of family and power and the nature of power and abuse of power. I keep saying power. Jade War, I think, is the best at uncovering and exploring both the world and the ideas on the page. This book takes everything that made Jade City really good and cranks it up a notch. The tension, when there's moments on the page that are a bit fraught, feel far more fraught in this book. The world is opened up and expanded, and you're given gradually more context of what the world looks like in a way that makes Jade City look actually a little bit feeble and small in retrospect. And it's almost a stereotype now to say about modern fantasy. They're not your typical characters. People in this story are black and white. We say that all the time about nearly every fantasy book we read these days, but it very much is applicable here. The people you root for, sometimes you just kind of go, what? If you couldn't, that would be great. It's not a quick read, or certainly I didn't find it a quick read. It takes its time, Jade War. There's a lot of slow, at times almost slightly tedious geopoliticking. Maybe one criticism you could have of the Greenbone saga as it progresses is that a lot of the gang fights get replaced with boardrooms. And you could maybe levy that critique here, but in my view, at this point, it's perfectly balanced, as all things should be, between the small, intimate family moments of book 1 and the brilliant world building and sense of scale that we do get in book 3. It sits right there in the middle, and for that reason, it's my favourite Fonda Lee book so far. Let's talk about Jim Butcher. I've only read the Dresden stuff, but I have read all the Dresden stuff, all the way up to The Law, and I'm looking forward to book, whatever it is, 18 in the Dresden Files that's due to come out, I believe, at the start of next year. Will I do a reread? I don't know, maybe. Here's the thing about the Dresden Files. People talk about the Dresden Files, and they kind of tier rank the books. This one is better than this one is better than this one. For me, they're kind of almost just like one big mush. I find it hard to articulate why one might be better than the other. We follow a wizard called Harry who lives in Chicago and solves paranormal mysteries. It does get more complicated from there. That is the very basic premise. They are fast, they are fun. I would argue they're not very deep, but I'd also argue they don't need to be deep. So I say this, they all kind of form a big mush in my mind. And yet at the same time, Small Favor is the best. It's the best. It's the best. It's also mental. Like, it starts with Harry having a snowball fight with some family friends before he gets absolutely, like, beat to the ground by anthropomorphized billy goats. That's how it starts, which is quite madcap, even for a Dresden Files book. And then it continues from there. And listen, I'm not going to tell you too much about the plot of the Dresden Files, and certainly not Small Favor. What I love about this book is how deliciously fast but calculated the pace is. This book is about 300 pages long. There is not a single wasted page. It is sequence after sequence after sequence. And sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't work. Even Battleground, book 17 in the Dresden Files, does the same thing on a war scale. And it doesn't work quite as well. But here it does work. And I'm not quite sure if that's because it's a more kind of smaller, intimate story, or maybe because it's just a little bit more tightly plotted, but here it is marvelous. It's so difficult to stop reading this book. I think I read it in one sitting, certainly two at the most. I think another reason I really appreciate Small Favor is we're spending a lot of time with some of the best characters and some of the best antagonists. They're really given front and center stage in this book. You know, when people talk about the Dresden Files, they often refer to Changes, which is book 12 and is planned to be almost exactly halfway through the Dresden Files. Changes is where everything changes, they say. Wait till you get to Changes. Nah. Listen, Small Favor is book 10 and it's better than Changes. Stop telling people to wait till Changes and tell them to get to Small Favor, because for me, Small Favor is the best Dresden Files book. Right, so I'm losing the lights, so I'll do two more for today. Let me know if you want a part two. Let's talk about Stephen King, who I have talked about previously on the channel. I would consider doing 11/22/63. I certainly think it's his best work, like the highest quality work he has written. But I want to choose The Drawing of the Three. I'm going to selfishly choose The Drawing of the Three because it's still the work that makes me go, ooh, which is exactly the high kind of vocabulary you want from both an English teacher and someone who's trying to speak publicly on YouTube. Ooh, right. Here's why. So The Drawing of the Three is book 2 in the Dark Tower series. 7 books in that main sequence and a lot of other books sort of feeding into it. It's a big multiverse thing with lots of paraphernalia. The Drawing of the Three is one of the most rewarding books I've read. And part of that is because how it sets itself in relation to book 1. So book 1 of the Dark Tower, called The Gunslinger, is a very ethereal, mystical book. You're not quite sure what's happening. It almost reads like a long, extended prose poem written by a teenager. And if that sounds controversial and polarizing, The Gunslinger is a very controversial, polarizing book. I like The Gunslinger, but I was also a 17-year-old who wrote rubbish, ethereal, mystical poetry. Anyway, what The Drawing of the Three does is it takes that ethereal, mystical, magical sense of setting and it just sort of collapses it into a much more gritty, grounded experience. And part of that is done by introducing new characters who are not sure who the main character Roland is, who are not sure what the Dark Tower is. It's almost like in any other fantasy book, they would be the protagonist because they would be almost the farm boy trope that is led out of the village into the wider universe. But here they're introduced as secondary characters. Previously in book 1, Roland was the main character. He is used to the world that we abide in for the Dark Tower. And so he just takes all this magical stuff that he's seeing for granted. And we sort of just have to kind of go, what's happening here? But with book 2, suddenly you have characters who go, hold on, man, this is a bit odd, isn't it? And it feels rewarding because you've gone through this sense of confusion in book 1. So that the earning of the answers as far as you get them feels much more gratifying. Much in a similar way to Small Favor, it's a very fast-moving book. You don't have a lot of downtime to sit and contemplate the state of the Union. That doesn't really happen. You are moving from sequence to sequence in a way that feels exhausting, but not flabby. It all feels calculated and every sequence feeds into the next sequence. And there are some moments in this book where I put it down and I just went, oh, that was very clever. Apparently Stephen King doesn't really plot. He just kind of goes for it. And if that's the case, man, good for him. Good for you, Stephen. I know you're watching. Secret subscriber. Forgive me, we're going to do one more author and then we're going to go and wrap up this video because we're really losing the light. But there's one author I want to talk about who I haven't talked about yet very much on my channel, and that is Ursula K LeGuin and her book The Farthest Shore, which for me is my favorite thing she's written. That being said, I haven't actually read that much Le Guin. I've read all of Earthsea, I've read Rackanon's World, and I've read Orsinian Tales, which they were all great. I mean, I haven't really read anything bad by Ursula K LeGuin. But The Farthest Shore, I don't know if it's because of the themes or because it's just a touch above the rest genuinely. But for me, it's an easy choice, The Farthest Shore. So 2 things you need to know. Earthsea novels, supposedly written for children, although we'll get to that. Number 2, They are very, very much, although it's a series, it feels to me very much standalone, Earthsea. There are through lines, but I think you could pick up books 2, and then book 3, and then book 1, and then book 4. I don't think you actually have to read them in order. So what happens in The Farthest Shore is that everyone becomes listless. They become grumpy. They become disinterested in the world. This is a general thing that's happening everywhere, which is not great. Kind of feels like living in Dundee. Imagine the whole world turns into Dundee. That's what you get with The Farthest Shore. Everyone just becomes a little bit grim. And the whole point of the novel is there's 2 characters, one of whom is recurring, and it was the protagonist of the first Earthsea book. Go on a quest, go on a journey to find out the reason for this listlessness. It's just a gorgeous book. Can't be more than 200 pages by most printings. It is respectful of children. Let me put it that way. I think we often talk, right, this should be a whole other video. We often talk about kids' fiction, and we use it as synonymous with simplistic fiction or easy fiction or stuff that is kind of training wheels to get to the real stuff later on. And Ursula K LeGuin says, absolutely not. I respect the young people who are going to read my book, and I'm going to take this seriously and the themes seriously, and I'm going to give my writing that level of poetic polish, coming back to the quality of the prose, that is worthy of young people, that is deserving of young people. And as an educator, that makes me dance. You know, she doesn't gather around all the young people who are going to read her book and say, hi, sweeties, are you okay? She treats her reader with a level of respect, which is very commendable when her audience does skew younger. And I don't think we talk about that in relation to Le Guin as much as we should. But for me, what makes The Farthest Shore my favourite Le Guin novel is the handling of theme. It is harsh but beautiful, because the main theme of this novel is mortality. The fact we're all going to die. And how do we deal with that? How do we cope with that? You know, I said in a previous video, 10 things I'm loving in fiction right now. I love a book that actually sits down to think about death and the afterlife and what that might mean and what that might not mean. This novel does that, and does it unflinchingly and kind of sternly, but again in a way that then shows that she's treating the reader with a measure of respect. One of the biggest gaps, I would say, in my reading right now is Ursula K LeGuin's sci-fi. As I say, I've only really read Rocannon's World, and I've heard that The Dispossessed, Left Hand of Darkness are all amazing text. And I believe you, don't get me wrong. But I find it hard to think about any book by Le Guin that will be better or maybe more suited for me than The Farthest Shore. Let me know if you would like a part 2. Let me know if you'd like a worst books by best authors. I'm happy to do that. Spoiler alert, it's White Sand. There's a bunch of other authors I did have written down for this. You know, Douglas Adams, Terry Pratchett. I had a lot more. Unfortunately, time is not on our side. So I'm going to go and get back to my family. I will see you on the next video. Goodbye.